everybody. Welcome to Samudra Shakti Online. And I'd like to introduce you now to Adam Ballenger. He is a world-class teacher that has been teaching yoga and practicing yoga for decades. In fact, he's been practicing for almost 30 years. One of the things Adam is best known for is anatomy, exercise science, physiology, and kinesthesiology. He does have graduate work in kinesthesiology as well. That's a hard word to say too, by the way. He is married and has a child as well. He says he's a lucky father and a proud husband. As well, Adam has a unique sense of humor with a lighthearted view of life in all its twists and turns and adventures. Adam teaches internationally from mainland China to Germany, Argentina, and to North America, Taiwan, the Netherlands, and more. Pretty much in our community in Anusara, we all know Adam's name. So Adam, I'd like to hand this off to you. I'm going to stop the screen share and turn this over to you. Welcome. Thank you for presenting tonight.
So I hope that's right. Oh. You gotta do the words too. Okay. I thought I would look up some chats online and see how to come in with style. So this is my best attempt. So when I was looking at the topics and like even just hearing the conversation about Julia pairing and the last time that we all got together in Colorado, my thoughts were just kind of, I was so happy to hear the conversations about alignment and biomechanics and movement and stuff like that. And there were just so many things that I thought there's so much stuff I don't need to bring up anymore because there's so many wonderful people talking about it. And even just as I went up to change my shirt, I heard Madhuri and Lisa talking about the big toe. And I think that was that from Julia pairing, you guys? She would. That's just awesome. I've been teased around the globe about how much I love and respect the big toe. So other people are talking about the big toe. So I wanted to go and take another step forward and open up a conversation that I think Anusara Yoga is just perfect for, and unpack it a little bit. And this conversation is, what if we think about alignment and movement, even as we're doing yoga, because we do that a lot. In our teacher trainings, we have a wonderful system to help us with posture and movement and how to practice asana. And then in more years recent, that the same principles can be applied not to just to practicing yoga asana, postures, and vinyasa, movement, but we can take the exact same concepts and apply them directly to just human movement for day-to-day activities. So if we take all that and we take it away from, how much shoulder loop do I need to body mechanics and anatomy? And what if we talk about it as a behavior work? It changes a little bit, or actually it can change a lot, what we're implying when we talk about applying alignment, doing a vinyasa, even our first principle, and we talk about how we put our feet down, how we position our body for our foundation. Are we very active and rooting in the foundation? Or are we very subtle and softening into it? If we think about all those not as a posture technique, but as a behavior, I want to start by putting it out there. What do you think that means? Does your brain spark up, or does it kind of like implode? So if anybody out there even just has an idea, what do you think it would mean to consider something that we often talk about is biomechanics and posture stuff? What do you think it would be if we just talked about it as a behavior? I'm waiting.
And then feel free to unmute and answer Adam's question or put something in the chat and I'll say it for you.
I'm curious if anybody has an idea, so I'll give it a couple seconds.
Adam, I'll chime in. I know that you know, when we talk about like the energy body and the layers of our being, right? And with behavior, we can recognize somebody from a great distance away, right? I can be walking on the beach in Florida, and on a beautiful day, I'll know it's Maduri walking towards me, you know, from a half a mile away. And it's through the movement of her that I recognize her, and her personality even, right? So that, I mean, I would guess I would say behavior might be connected to personality and how we carry ourselves. So that's how I'll start.
Yeah, very much. And part of what you know, I would like how you put that, mannerisms. So postural, gestural, movement, mannerisms, and how we as other humans witness and identify these are behaviors. How do we move? How do we conduct ourselves? Yeah. Okay.
So I would chime in and go back to what I'm interested in hearing, your ideas around attitude, the Anusara, like the first thing that we talk about when we come into Anusara, and movement and anatomy as behavior, and how those two link up, because that's where my mind goes. Is so much of what we're doing is, conscribed by our attitude that we come to the practice with.
Yeah, and this is a couple moments ago, I even mentioned that I think that for Anusara yoga particularly, and I know more about this school than I know about any other school, so I don't mean to mention Anusara as it's better than others. It's just the one I'm familiar with. That the Iccha, Jnana, Kriya, attitude, alignment, action, a lot of times behavior is linked in with like emotional or cognitive behavioral issues, topics, techniques for how do we work with a behavior that for yoga language is not dharmic. For just lay folks, we'd probably say it's a behavior that is unconstructive or unhealthy, possibly. So starting with something that is attitudinal in Anusara yoga lends even more to a behavioral concept than a biomechanical concept. And if you're familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's even kind of growing, we even have some mindfulness inroads into these that are just fantastic these days, that there is certain technical aspects that can come up even when we get into emotional and attitudinal topics. We can get into those places, but there's still a skill. And so when something is not dharmic or not being performed skillfully and the outcomes are not desirable, just like a cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral approach, a movement, a kinesthetic behavioral approach works very, very similarly. Yeah. I just talked around that a lot. I hope that was at least interesting.
So Amber just put in the chat, she's interested in hearing your ideas around habits. And then Jennifer Benning was talking about balance and alignment.
Yeah, so habits are, we can get into where possibilities of origin. What we're dealing with in the moment is an expression of a pattern that has been ingrained in some fashion or form. We could have speech patterns, we could have movement patterns, we can have other types of behavioral patterns. So a pattern is something that has been ingrained so much that it becomes more of typically we're going to say like an automatic response. So, if you've heard certain language in the house, in your home, as you've been growing up, a pattern has developed in the way that you're going to use language. If you've seen emotional patterns at home, you're probably going to mimic those or have at least some sort of an input influence on you. And the likelihood that you'll express something similar to those patterns goes way up. And what's really, really interesting for movement too, human movement, is that one of the major influences is the way our parents move. And so the ideas of nature and nurture, a lot of times we will physically, posturally, kinematically carry ourselves with similar patterns to what we witness in other folks. So even what you see on the yoga mat, when you see somebody else do a yoga pose, Madhuri can probably join in with me, but there used to be kind of a chuckle where you could go around the yoga community, and like if you went to a big festival somewhere, you could walk into a room and you wouldn't even know what style they were teaching, and then you'd see everybody start moving and you'd be like, I'm in the Iyengar thing, or I'm in the Ashtanga, or I'm in Shiva Rays, or Baron Baptiste. So we're seeing the expression of a pattern that has become ingrained so much that it is dominant, and it's likely to be something that we call up if we don't bring a lot of awareness and decide to express a different pattern.
So Will Duran is asking, what comes first, pattern or the cause of the pattern? I think you were talking a little bit about that just before, and then age, and he's talking more about, like, as we know, Adam, we're all getting a little older, and like age and the degradation in the body and what causes a pattern of movement with age.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of this chicken and the egg debate. And if we go way back to early childhood development, that if you look around the planet, and this is a generality, there are some outliers, but it is such a strong body of evidence that if we look around the planet at early childhood development, we will see almost the exact same movement development, which is really an expression of their neurological development. And we'll see that with children all over the world, with some small variations for environment. So if you go to a place where it's nice and warm, and the kids get to basically grow up, crawling around in the dirt, they'll show a slightly different evolution of their patterns than somebody who grows up and they're up in the Arctic, or they're near the Arctic, and so they're in big shoes and stuff like that as they begin to get into their end of the first year into their second year movement patterns. So there is a little bit that appears to be just into the human. Part of that is also determined by the structure that we have as human beings. So there's a little bit that is kind of predetermined. Now you can mess with that. And one of the things that I find really interesting about that is children learn how to move without adult-like study. So when you watch a child move, and one of the things, if you get curious about it, is you can look up DNS, capitalize all those, movement patterns. And so this is a kind of a school of thought, and it is about the dynamic, we'll just say the dynamics of the neuromuscular system. And what's probably more key in this is the nervous system that's being expressed by the movements that an infant is doing. And if I just messed up my DNS, somebody can correct me on that. But an interesting story, my brother, who's a physical therapist, was visiting, we were having a big Thanksgiving dinner, and one of my cousins had I think it was a 4-year-old child, and he was watching the way the 4-year-old was moving, and he had checked on the age and went back to the parents and said, hey, I think you might want to go and go check with your general practitioner or your pediatrics person. I just have this hunch that something might be going on. And part of what he was seeing was that the normal neurological development that would be expressed in the way an individual or a child would be moving was not being expressed. A different pattern was being expressed, as this was symbolic of what the neurological system was doing, expressed through human movement. So they went and got the child checked out. It turned out there were some issues, and they had a very early interaction with those, and the child's just done fantastic. So a little bit to the answer of Will's question, we do have certain things that we have to work with. It appears that we come into this world predetermined on certain movement paths, and then there's a period where we can specialize a lot. And then as we get older, there's quite a different thing that happens, which is the internal environment. This is what's more common if we just say aging. Is the normalcy with aging is that certain tissues in the body don't repair as quickly, or even begin to not repair. And things like the cartilage that covers the ends of bones and joints is not really a material in the body that recuperates or regenerates. So over a lifespan, as that deteriorates, the internal environment of a joint structure is very different than when we're younger. And we are very, very adaptive as humans, but we're not naturally very corrective. So if we have discomfort or loss of higher function, so sometimes we won't even really feel, if you did that question that the doctors give you on a scale from 1 to 10, how much pain would you say you have? My dad is one of these old stoic, he's actually a really cool guy. He's not totally stoic, but if you would have asked him, like, how much pain do you have, in your knees, 10 or 15 years ago, he'd probably say, like, oh, it's nothing, but then if you watch the way he was moving, he would be avoiding a lot of these joint structures because of the lack of efficiency in the movement. So when there's even a minor amount of pain that you might not identify as pain, your body will tend to avoid that and adapt to the discomfort that's within its own system. It's not really going to go in there and correct things, but we can get into something where if you already know how on your own, or you have the help of somebody else, there are some things that we can be corrective about. It really depends on tissues and the ability of a person to learn something, to learn a new way to move, and then continue on. But at some point, Will, and this is what I love, is that at some point, if you live long enough, then your movement behavior is either going to stop moving because it's not rewarding in how efficient it is, or it's painful, or it gets into a real psychosocial issue that you're going to either stop moving or make a positive adaptation. The stopping of moving, which affects our physiology incredibly, usually just cuts the lifespan down so quick that the answer to that question is morbid. Yeah. Now that I've got your attention, you're gonna die. On the flip side of that, and I don't know if I put a link on here. It was one of the links that I had paused because I really wanted to look up some things that I really like making a point of, is the difference between curing and healing. So oftentimes, a cure is to make right what was wrong. Even a broken bone, we could say if it's mended really well, the broken bone issue has been cured. Okay. To heal is more that to make whole again. And my wife is studying counseling and stuff, so we get into these really wonderful behavioral conversations sometimes. And the body is a little bit different than just thinking psychologically, because the idea psychologically that we can heal even though we still have a wound is a little bit different than the human body. But it's really, really similar. In fact, it's similar enough that you could have arthritis in a joint and essentially not be able to cure that and make the arthritis disappear like it was never there, but we could heal the individual. And in some of my graduate work, I had a really good time. You got to understand, in some of these courses, I'm like, or even then in some of these courses, I was still one of the older people, and almost everybody wanted to be like a trainer or a coach for some professional team, or go do physical therapy for high-end athletes and stuff. And so here I am, just in these groups, just going, I'm a yoga teacher. And half the people in there are kind of going like, yoga's good, yoga's bad. So I would come into these things and would bring up this topic about curing versus healing. And if we look at a holistic approach, and I would find studies where they would, one of my favorite studies was about low back pain. And they did the exact same physical therapy as one of the test groups. Another group did no therapies or modalities. But the group that did the physical therapy and did psychological counseling had far better results. They didn't fix their back more than the other group, but what they did was more of the whole body, the whole self thing. How does this person picture themselves? At the ends of what they could tissue repair, tissue evolve, and movement function improve. And that's one of the things, going back to this other question about starting with attitude. There are times when that's all we have. And when somebody has faith or belief, it's amazing of the trickle-down effect into the body. Because this is holistic, and we can't separate movement from mood. A person's outlook, their attitude is just, sometimes it's revolutionary. When you get somebody who's in pain and they're angry about it or they're scared about it, it is so challenging to work with. And I'm going to throw my segue in there, but then I'll come back and open everything up. My segue is a teeny tale about me working in my active aging classes, which is an Anusara yoga class, but that wouldn't make sense to a group of seniors. So active aging was like the thing. It's all Anusara. Amber can tell you. Amber subbed it. So I was trying to teach better body mechanics and all this kind of stuff, and it went well. And then we'd get up to a certain block, and one of the major blocks was trying to do balance work. And I did all the body mechanics, the strengthening the big toe. I did all that, and we just kept hitting this thing that we couldn't get past. And it took me a couple of years to decide, what am I going to try this year? And I usually break these up into like 3 or 4 month chunks, 3 or 4 months of philosophy, 3 or 4 months of heavier anatomy or physical development or biomechanics or whatever it is. And so I decided this one year is we're going to do a bunch of mindfulness. And I would use mindfulness terms, but in my head, I'm actually thinking open to grace. And one of the exercises that just helped a ton was I had everybody hold on to something so that they were more stable, and then lift one leg, and we'd hold it for a while. And during this, I didn't talk about any like push down with your big toe. I didn't go over 4 corners of the feet or any of that. I just said, come up and take a breath as best you can. Hold on for dear life if you need to, and you can get nervous or whatever. And then when you come down, I want you to remember how nervous you were and tell me about it. And so we did a mindfulness thing, and it was like the whole group was like nervous. And if they weren't nervous, they did on the next exercise, which was do the same thing and close your eyes. So we went in and we elicited the likelihood of an internal reaction, which is behavioral, to an environmental situation, which is, again, that's our behavioral stuff. And when that happened, and number one, everybody had the same thing, nobody felt alone. Nobody felt alone. We tried it with one eye closed. So I had a little bit more vision. We tried it with both eyes open, and it was just amazing to see people begin to improve balance without doing biomechanics. Now, how do you think that affected things when we went back to doing biomechanics for balance? Because they were no longer in that same fight, flight, freeze, heightened reactivity to a balanced situation. So the biomechanics stuff went through the roof. It was fantastic. Amber can tell you, sometimes we'll be in there doing balance stuff, and there's balance is not a giant issue in the public classes that we used to do. And occasionally there'd be somebody just sitting there, standing on one leg, just going like, I'm balancing, And we would play these games too. And this is another great thing to do with behavioral work, as we do learning exercises moreover than physical conditioning. So we did a focused play exercise, which is we're going to try to stand on one leg. I want you to look around and see how many people you can see. You can hold your giant foam roller as much as you want or as little as you want. And then when you start to look around, anytime you start to feel unstable, I want you to check and see what it's like when you're there, and check and see if you can get a little more comfortable on the edge of that instability, and then check and see if you can look at anybody else. And that's one of the ways we did it. And one of the outcomes of that was that generally in the group, you'd have a lot of people looking around at each other, smiling like little kids balancing on tight ropes. Because they're just playing at that little edge, like I might fall. But we've already gone through a process of reducing that early response to a fear of falling. Yeah. That's more of a behavioral approach too. Spread your toes, push down all four corners. We could consider that part of a movement skill, and we could connect it to a behavior. But it's a little bit more over on the edge of biomechanics, conditioning, endurance type stuff, depending on how we do it. Long answer there. Will, was that enough?
So go ahead, Will.
It seems to me that, and taking just my own personal study over the decades of practicing yoga and hip replacements and the like, is that, the healing is my attitude towards what I can and can't do, it seems. So for even me teaching, and through Zoom, I'm demonstrating a lot more, doing the class a lot more than I usually would when I teach in a group. And in demonstrating balance poses, I find that for me to recognize that if I reach out and touch a wall to help me get steady, and then maybe reach my arms up in tree pose or whatnot, that to me, the healing is the recognizing that this is what works for me, and that everyone should be saying, what do you feel? What is your body telling you? And then move accordingly from that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. Recognizing that getting old is not easy.
No. And the more times that I think it's very, very important on this topic with the human body to recognize that at a certain point it is in a functional decline. And that may be like a shocking thing to hear, or something where I've worked in groups for years, how to come into a group and talk about the human body, that it is at some point going to be, if we're comparing it to its apex of physical prowess, that it will be in some sort of a, comparatively speaking, functional decline. And then I go through a long process of describing how, if we would redefine its function, then maybe it's not in the same decline that makes us go, I don't want to talk about that right now. You know, you gulp deep and go, what do you mean this thing isn't gonna, you know, do what I want? So how we reference and work that, especially instead of thinking about it on a biomechanics thing, because the long-term aspect of corrective exercise, corrective functioning work for the human body is going to decline. But if we look at it in a behavioral way, and we say, well, from that perspective, when my knees really hurt, let's figure out really positive, adaptive ways to work with that. And some of the early stuff with knees is, you know, maybe work on muscle balance in the hips and the feet. And I've started doing this years ago, is mixing in functional movement observations, not teaching functional movement assessment, but functional movement observations, and starting to point out to teachers what we're seeing in this loop or this spiral right here is that there's an imbalance. And we can see that maybe not when they're standing at the front of their yoga mat in perfect harmony, but we see it when they step back into a lunge or forward. And so we'll do a little bit of stuff and we'll find out if there is the immovable rock. You know, I have no more meniscus, I have osteoarthritis or whatever it is. And that's really not for me. If that's the situation, that's between them and their doctor or their physical therapist. But for me, to think about it as a shifting out of optimal blueprint. Optimal blueprint for me doesn't mean, well, it would be optimal if the knee wasn't like that. What I'm looking at is a knee that is going to send a message through the rest of the system, avoid, 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 if it doesn't get enough support from its surrounding tissues. And even then, it's likely to be more tender than a knee that didn't have any degradation. So coming back in and saying, well, we have an ankle, we have a knee, we have a hip, and we're going to try to get a little more harmony with respect to the actual condition in there. And when we start balancing out what each one of those are doing, we're getting into a response, not only to the external environment, but a response to the internal environment, like discomfort. If we want to make it less scary, we could say like a tight hamstring rather than osteoarthritis. While we're trying to get hamstrings to be more functional, there might have to be an adaptation in the process of healing, which I really, really like, because then we don't have to fix things that are natural, but maybe not wanted. And when we do that, what we begin to find is I can have a brilliant existence, even while I'm having this natural experience where my body is going through some changes that a lot of society would consider negative. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this stuff like, is aging a disease? And I just thought, oh my God, the last thing I can imagine is a world filled with pubescent young boys. So, in the lifespan of this embodiment, eventually this body is going to say, you're going to have to figure out some other methods to get to those places you really love. A runner's high, which is also fantastic for mood issues, is a wonderful skill and avenue to have, but it's not intended to be permanent. It can't. So our body, our physical terrestrial existence is going to continue to drive us towards, in my opinion, a deeper and higher relationship with self. So if your positive psychology has come by, every time you have a conflict with your kid or your spouse or your job or your cats, you have to run as fast as you can for 28 miles, or, go do CrossFit, or even sit there and do Surya Namaskars until you're numb in all your joints and you fall over. At some point, the body's going to say, okay, we know what it feels like when you get to the place that's more comfortable, but you're going to have to figure out a different way to get there. I'll give you an analogy, and I'm talking a ton. I told everyone before we started I could talk this whole time. And this is an analogy I use when we turn the corner from trying to fix students and clients to trying to help them. And I just love this one. And I think about it very fondly growing up, that, when you're a little kid and you fall down and your parents come and they pick you up, and maybe they dust you off and they say, by the way, I hope you had this. Somebody, parent, guardian, brother, sister, would pick you up and, brush you off and say, you're okay, you're okay. And we could go far into that and say, like, that you're okay doesn't imply you're not in pain. But they pick you up. What they're doing with you is they're not making a contract that they're going to pick you up and dust you off for the rest of your life. What they're doing is they're giving you this experience of receiving love and care so that you can one day try to figure out how to find that in yourself and not necessarily need to fall down to bring it up, or not necessarily need somebody else to come over and give it to you for you or remind you where to find it. So the wholeness in a yoga or a Buddhist way, the purnatva, the fullness, is something that's beyond just physical activity. And when we go for a wonderful run or we have a wonderful yoga session and you feel wonderful inside, that is way beyond the body. It's inclusive of that, but it is also beyond. So if you've been practicing over a lifetime, or you've been practicing, through your 40s, into your 50s, into your 60s, or you started when you're 60 or 70 or whatever, one of the things that you're kind of being funneled into in an adaptive way is to develop your own fulfillment and not have the attachments that used to be so easy to get fulfilled with. That's one way to look at it. Yeah. And then that's why behavior is so wonderful, is my behavior is bigger than just movement. And that's why we have cognitive behavior, movement behavior. We have a whole bunch of different things. Yeah. Okay.
So Will's question is, healing behavior is accepting what you have?
Well, I think that's a step. Yeah, I think that's totally a step. But the expression of that behavior, which requires an acceptance, like working from something that you don't have, working from something that's not accurate in the moment, oftentimes the outcome of that, whether it's the way you speak, the way you emote, the way you relate emotionally with somebody, the way you move your body, just accepting doesn't bridge that gap to now you're going to express something. And my example is knowing that you get upset. And we could say it's, about anything. But just knowing that you get upset sometimes, accepting that you get upset sometimes, doesn't automatically mean that you go and you tell somebody, hey, I'm just upset. It's not about you. I get upset about pine cones and squirrels. The behavior, now that you're going to be in front of somebody and maybe you're upset, and maybe you could let them know, hey, this is just me. It's not on you. And it passes. Don't worry about it. I saw a squirrel. That's the new behavior. The acceptance is an important part in how you react and then broadcast something. So the behavior you could think a lot about is the organic stuff. It's what's going to come out. It's going to be my words. It's going to be my hugs, my kisses, my fists. It's going to be how I move my feet. And the muscular energy is how we're taking it in. And if you want to get even more playful with it, we could even say that the focal point might be cognitive, it might be emotional, or it might be movement, physical. So the focal point is going to have a lot to do with how and what I then express from my interaction with my environment, what I'm bringing in. Did you guys expect a muscle and organic energy analogy? I hope that helps. Well, yeah, I love it when, I love it when I see it in myself, when I think I've accepted something well, but I haven't changed my behavior yet. Yes, I'm getting old, so I need to take 2 leave and then run.
I want to, Barbara put in something, and Barbara, I think it's the way you've written this, I'd rather you just kind of unmute yourself and share with us what it is that you're trying to say here.
In other words, it's too whatever. Oh, I just was kind of resonating with what you were saying, Adam, that with Anusara's first principle, open to grace, it takes it out of the curing and just the physicality and limited mindset over whatever's going on for an individual, and hopefully opens it up to how might our hearts and our bodies and our minds be informed by spirit and be, I like that that's the first principle, and then we get into the others, this, that's the basis for me.
Yeah. No, sometimes if I'm teaching a course, I'll present options that we might be able to look at this almost through different chakra lenses. So that grace coming in, let me put it in this way, like a learner's perspective. Some learners really draw it in etherical, imaginative, creative, and some learners draw whatever they're coming in. And we could say they're letting the grace come in, kinesthetic, but that we're getting into allowing it in.
Right, and I think when you you allowed people to name their fear about losing their balance or their discomfort about that allowed them to then be vulnerable, be open to what else they could do, be playful with it, be not afraid, because they were able to move on through it. I thought that was a great example that you gave of what I would say was an opening to something more graceful than kind of our limited way of looking at things.
Yeah, it's so, man, with human movement, there's so many different ways we can bring up the issue of limited input. And that could be, again, so a human behavior has multiple different factors. We break them out so that if you wanted to go be, a psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, if you wanted to be a speech pathologist, if you wanted to be a kinesiologist or a physical therapist, we delineate them out so that we can go and look at a branch and have some ideas how to work with an issue with how or what we allow in and the dysfunction that often comes with what we do with it. And we can look at an issue if we won't let it in, or we process it with an unfortunate bias, or we don't have the capability to then turn it into organic and create expression with it. It's kind of like somebody, who doesn't have great language skills, wanting to tell somebody how much they love them and they just can't put the words together,
Or when you're talking about teaching people about their bodies, I mean, it's an emotional equivalent of lack of proprioception. I mean, if you can't name, people don't realize that it's a fear, or, that, oh, I'm afraid of that. Well, so what's going to happen if I go off balance? But, I've got a hold of a railing, just allowing it to happen, which we adults, get less comfortable with just trying. thankfully, thanks to my Anusara teachers, I learned that, gee, actually losing your balance is actually a gift. That's how your brain learns that that's where you are in space again. So it just made it so much more playful to me. Now it's amazing. I have almost fallen so hard on the icy snow this winter, but somehow or other popped back up. And I'm always like, thanks.
Well, this is mostly a talky presentation, but if you want, you can follow along, and we'll do. I'd like to say we're just going to do one exercise, but I have no idea how many we'll do. So if you're up for it, go ahead and stand up. And Amber's done this in class in the active aging, and then I've done it. I thought, God, it goes so well there. I've done it with those folks who believe they're indestructible. Okay, so you can go ahead and stand up. Oh man, my Apple thing is, I don't know if I'll be able to tip it up. So you might have to look at my core. Oh, there we go. So this is one of my favorite exercises, Barbara, and I hope you dig this. Just as best you can, just lift one of your feet, even if it's just, inches off the floor. Or, and this is, I'm trying to squat down so you guys can see me. I don't know if I have any other things to wedge under there. You could also just lift one heel. So more of your weight is in one leg. As soon as we are not 50-50, we're essentially balancing predominantly in one side. So for balance, it begins even before a foot or leg has lifted off. Switch legs. Guys are getting a pretty good workout, I can tell. So again, the foot that you're gonna lift, you could keep a toe down, you could lean on something, you can do whatever you need. This is a little bit to prove a point. That foot that you're lifting up, what I'd like you to do for a second is just take that leg, and you can make it straight again, but hold it a little bit out to that side, and then very slowly fall into both feet. Okay, good. So we know how to fall. There you go. So if your foot is now 10 inches up and you begin to lose your balance, get it as close to the floor as gently as you can, and then just lean that way. There you go. Good. Have a seat. Tough workout. I'm gonna need some electrolytes. Yeah. So Barbara, this was like a revelation when in working with these older populations in how do we teach to the whole self. And even if what I would like to do is help their body mechanics, healing is gonna have to go through, even if I want positive biomechanic adaptations to sore knees, I'm gonna have to work with the whole self. And so approaching the heart for some folks is just like magic. For some folks, giving them a real technical explanation, takes the lid off the box. And for some folks, feeling it, we wiggle around on the ground, or feeling that, boy, you can, hey, that's falling. When I just put my foot down and it was over there, I'm like, yeah, if you get your foot close enough to the floor, that's what it's going to be like when you fall out of tree pose. So yeah, for human movement as a behavior, there are multiple approaches that we can take to optimize or improve with consideration. And this is, I really take liberties with Sanskrit. So upekshana is, and this was one Amber, I think, probably sat in one of the classes with the seniors to look beyond. I checked with a Sanskrit scholar and then took some heavy liberties and described it, instead of looking beyond, would be to situate yourself so that you could look beyond with respect to the obstacle. So I would only consider how far do I want to lift my foot? I would only do that with respect to the challenge or the obstacle that's going on, my fear, my sore knee, whatever it is. And so to really embody that and to embody and take into account the thing that we're supposedly looking and gazing beyond. If you did want to look beyond like a wall or a fence, you'd scoot back. How far would you scoot back? Enough so that you could peer over it. So you would adjust yourself wisely. And I say the wisely because I tend to traverse over into the thinking, but you would adjust yourself empathetically. How much will I tend and befriend myself if I fall over and it hurts? And if you really feel like you can fall over and it'll hurt and you won't beat yourself up emotionally or second guess yourself haphazardly, then wow, now our body movement stuff is something where we can begin to really frame ourselves in a really highly respectful and empathetic way. I guess the short end of it is that the body is absolutely important, but what it's important for is probably lost in our higher years of prowess. And then if you look at that and you go back to our Anusara principles as we might apply them to the body, you can begin to open up your thoughts and maybe just, your creative thinking about what we can do when we practice asana. What type of skill, whether it's a movement skill, like I can push down through my big toe and not fall over, or whether it's an awareness skill practiced through the body, or it's like an emotional, self-soothing, self-care, tend and befriend skill. And every single one of these comes back down and affects our human movement function. So from the bottom up and the top down, we can talk about this in something where it's not so scary as don't break my heart. And then maybe we can transfer what we do in our body over into these other areas. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. An hour is not enough, right? There's the truth. And that's why we offer trainings and workshops and events. So if people want more of Adam, his website is adamballengeryoga.com.